My favorite movie scenes is a really tender scene. It's from the movie Patriot, which is actually a very bloody and violent movie. It's a Mel Gibson movie. It's obvious that that's how he likes to portray and communicate the power of the truth. But anyway, there's this amazing scene. I don't know if you ever saw it. This movie in the year 2000 with this little girl. She's like 4 years old. She's one of the cutest little things you see. She's like in her white nightgown and she's got her little baby doll. And they're on this beach and the sun is just coming up. So it's like they just woke up and her dad's going to be going off to war. And her little name is Susan. And so as Mel Gibson's saying goodbye to all of his family, he gets down to this little girl who for 4 years had not spoken to him. And when he gets to give her a hug, she backs away. And then he kneels down to try to reach out, and she backs away further and denies him even the chance to hug her. And so he basically just says, "Won't you just say one word to me?" And then he walks away, and he's like in tears, and he gets up on his horse, and he's riding out onto this, they're on this beach, and he's riding away. And the pans to the little girl who's looking up at her daddy, pans back to the daddy, and then back to the girl, and holding her thing. She goes, "Daddy, don't go." And then Mel Gibson turns around, and he comes running back, and the two of them start running at each other. And he gives her like the biggest hug. And she goes, "Daddy, don't go. I'll say anything you want me to, as long as you don't leave me." And I don't know what it is that sometimes mutes our hearts from speaking. There are things that maybe build up in our life that don't allow us to be able to speak from our hearts. Maybe it's first and foremost to our Father in heaven, to God. But maybe it's also those beloved people around us. But we can hear in today's gospel, and you can hear throughout the verses of the psalm, and you can hear it throughout Jeremiah. It's one of the backdrop settings of all of Lent. That sometimes it's good to go but beyond what I think and allow our hearts to speak to the love that the Father has for us, and to be able to have that courage to know, okay, these are things that harden my heart, and if I give that over to God, how they can then become sources to be able to express deep desire for love. And what's so beautiful about what the Lord's asking us today is he comes up to a man who's prevented from speaking. And the Lord looks at him and knows that one of the main reasons why he's prevented from speaking is not because he's weak, or not because he's a bad person. It's because he's weak. We're all weak. We all have these weaknesses. And I would suggest that very rarely it's because of malice that maybe our hearts get hardened. And it's so good for us to be able to just go to the Lord and say, "Lord, this has muted me. Take it from me. I feel it. I get it. Now I just want to hand it over to you." And, I don't know if you feel this way, but I certainly do. It's so hard to speak about Jesus today. Like Beelzebub, who's like the number 2 guy. The number 1 guy is Lucifer. Beelzebub is number 2, so that's why he's just the prince. He's not the king. And Jesus knows that. He's like, "I've seen this character before. He's like the number 2 bad guy. He's like Darth Vader. He's not the real guy, he's just the number 2 guy." And so Jesus sees him and says, "Oh, this is just Beelzebub," and just kicks him right out. But what does Beelzebub, the number 2 demon, want to do? He wants to mute us. He's like that controller, the controller of the TV. Yeah, he looks at you and says, "Mute, mute, mute." That's what he loves. He loves it when we Catholics come to daily Mass and then don't speak about the fact that we just had Jesus in our hearts for 15 minutes. He loves that. He thinks that's like the best thing ever. Like to not go outside today and share with somebody how Jesus just came into your heart today, tenderized it, and filled it with this tremendous word of love. He loves it when we don't do that. He thinks this is the greatest thing ever. Oh, I don't want to infringe my religious experiences on somebody else, or whatever the excuse is that the devil loves to plant into our hearts so that we don't share how the Father has come back to us. And we, like that little child, we want to say something, but it's as if we're prevented from it. And it's in the depths of our heart where we just need to be able to cry out to our Father and tell him that you love him and that you don't want him to go away. You know, one of the greatest compliments I've ever received was this 3-year-old. Her name is Margie. And I got to see Margie when she was just in little diapers and just kind of crawling around. She might still, are 3-year-olds diapers? I don't know. Yeah, they are kind of, depends. That's kind of like when it depends. It's funny. But anyway, so it's like this little girl, and so she comes to Mass on Wednesdays with her parents. And so for the last few years, I've watched her just grow up, and the first word I ever heard out of her mouth, do you know what it was? Jesus. And I kept hearing her say, Jesus. I'm like, man, can you imagine being Jesus, hearing a little 3-year-old say your name? Ah, I mean, imagine that's what it's like to be a mom, right? Or a dad. And there's always that debate. What's the first word out of your child's mouth, right? It's always dad, 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 dad. Moms, I feel bad for that. That's a tough word to say, so don't feel bad about it, but that's what happens. So anyway, this little one, Jesus, and she kept saying, Jesus. And I'm like, oh man, that just sounds amazing. But then I started to realize she was pointing to me and calling me Jesus. And so she would leave and she would say, bye, Jesus. And I'm like, I don't want you to leave. Can you just stay here and keep calling me Jesus? You know what I mean? Oh, you want to tenderize your heart, just be called Jesus. And the thing is that happens to us so many times. But what's our normal reaction? Oh, if only you knew me. Oh, I'm not Jesus. How many of us, when somebody will look at us and maybe see Jesus in you, or love the fact that you love them, or maybe today you're praying for them and something happens, and you always deflect it with this type of humility that doesn't truly allow you to speak in your heart the love that you have in Jesus, and then the love you have for others, because you're like, oh no, I'm not that person. If only you knew me. But then it's like, God the Father looks at you and says, no, but like I baptized you into my Son, and like as a Christian, I'm dwelling inside of you. And like, I don't know how many times you've had communion in your life, but that communion, union, you're united to Jesus. So it's okay if somebody compliments you for your holiness. Like, we don't have to deflect that. We can actually like embrace it, love it. And maybe even that's a way for that childlike love in us to be tenderized in the simplicity of our faith, to be expressed in the most natural ways. I think all of us have that child in us that want to just be able to open up with great love to our beloveds and not worry about false humility or all these things, because the devil, he wants to mute that. You know, that little girl in the Mel Gibson movie, the reason why she couldn't speak to her dad is because she saw her mom die in such a terrible way. And then her dad went off to fight for the freedom of their country. It's The Patriot, it's the name of the movie. And I think that's the main reason how the devil can mute us, is that we have these evil things that happen. We store them in the depths of our heart, and we don't open them up with Jesus. So I don't know what it is that can sometimes hold us back to having that voice of God speak to us, so that we don't not harden our hearts, but when the voice of God speaks to us, we open up our hearts.